events. We shall start off with, inshallah, recitation of the Quran. And for that, I'd like to invite Mr. Arshad Haq up to the stage.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون صدق الله العظيم.
So inshallah, our moderator tonight will be Sister Hind Makki, and she'll be introducing the event as well as the panelists. And to say something about her, a few words about her, Sister Hind Makki is an educator, a consultant, and a writer at the Muslim channel at Pathos. And she has worked extensively within the American Muslim community on civic integration, interfaith dialogue, and civic and leadership development since 2001, delivering hundreds of trainings and lectures throughout the United States and Western Europe. In 2008, she participated in the Muslim Youth Project Exchange Program to the Netherlands and was a fellow of the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute. She curates the website Side Entrance, which won the 2013 Brass Crescent Award for Best Female Blogger, and showcases Muslim women's prayer spaces in mosques around the world. Her work has been published in the New York Times, and she has appeared on Al Jazeera English and the Huffington Post Live. Without further ado, Sister Hind Makki.
Thank you, Brother Babar, and to my friend Tahira and the folks here at Northwestern. This is really strange because you people over here can't see me. I'm short. I'm much shorter than all of the three panelists, but is there a way to...
What did you want to do?
I'm sorry?
What did you want to do?
I feel like I'm hidden. Okay, it's okay. It's okay. You're not here to see me anyway, and perhaps that's even better because I literally just arrived last night, or I spent part of this week in Vienna, Austria. It's a very beautiful city, and I was invited to speak at the King Abdullah Institute for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue. This is an annual event that is hosted in the city of Vienna, and it brings together hundreds of practitioners, educators. Okay, thank you. It brings together, hello. Hi. It brings together practitioners, educators, academics, and government officials to really think about the role of interfaith dialogue in creating peace and understanding around the world. What I found really interesting about this conversation that I was having with all of the people in the room in Austria was that they were not asking themselves the question, does religion even matter? They have come to the conclusion that yes, religion matters, and then let us now talk about that when it comes to international dialogue, when it comes to developing education models, and really thinking about peace. And I think it's very easy for a lot of people to just assume that yes, religion does matter. But I am really excited about tonight because we would like to unravel this question and really unpack the layers that that bring this question together. And each one of our three panelists, and I don't know how they're going to answer the question, does religion matter, yes or no? And perhaps this is not even the correct question to answer. I'm very excited to hear their perspectives. Each one of our esteemed panelists is coming from a different perspective, even though they are all nationally known speakers, and I'll be sharing with you their biographies in a minute. What I would also like to say is that I had the opportunity to do a little bit of sightseeing when I was in Vienna. It's a stunningly beautiful city, and Catholicism is the national religion of the country officially. And you see the effects of Catholicism in Catholic history and European history everywhere. I was able to look at St. Stephen's Church, which is in the central district of the city, and it's stunning and very beautiful. And as I walked around the church with a couple of my hosts who came from the Muslim youth of Austria, I saw a statue, which they said, look a little bit closer at this statue and tell me what you think of it. And essentially it is a crusader, a man with a cross on his chest and holding the crusader flag in white and red and gold, and he's standing atop a dead Ottoman soldier. And you have a secular country where you have the majority of the people in that country are secular. They might originate from a Catholic background, but they don't necessarily believe in religious rituals and theology. But the national identity is entwined with this religious conflict that they'd had with Muslims. And so I thought to myself, does religion matter? Well, I don't know. Every day these people are living their lives day in and day out and making moral decisions based on their own moral perspective. But does religion matter on a larger scale, on a national scale? Again, I don't know, because you have a country that has its identity entwined with its history in the Crusades, and yet it is the first European country that acknowledges Islam as an official religion, and they did that in 1912, which means that they have all of the equal rights as other Christian churches and other religious communities. And it's very interesting because as modernity theorists have developed this ideology that as a country develops its modernity, becomes industrialized, religious identity actually decreases among the people of that country, so that as you have access to better education, as you have access to economic development, then you feel that you do not need to have to take the religion pill. And in some ways, we see that actually happening. As you see, the Pew Research Foundation last year in October came out with a report that says about 1 in 5 Americans today under the age of 30 actually believe themselves to be quote unquote nuns. These are people who are not nuns with their habits, but nuns, N-O-N-E-S, people who do not believe in God necessarily, agnostics, atheists, secular humanists. And is it really true that as a country develops economically, politically, culturally, then the people themselves don't feel the need to have a religious identity? I think these are really interesting questions that I've had swirling around my head for the last several years, and certainly the last several weeks as I was talking to Tahira and Babar about this conference, or about today's event. And the way it's going to go down tonight is that we're going to hear from each one of our 3 panelists, and then we will have a time for a Q&A from you and from myself. And there will be people with note cards, passing note cards around, and you can send the questions up to me, and I'll be able to pose that to our panelists. So our first panelist today is somebody who is very well known. Our academic on the panel is Haroon Moghul, and he is somebody whose work I have followed for a long time. I'm really excited to hear him present in person. And he's the associate editor and columnist at Religious Dispatches and a fellow at both the Center on National Security at Fordham Law, and he's with the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. He's currently completing his doctorate at Columbia University and is the author of The Order of Light, which was published in 2006. He is a prolific writer, as I mentioned, and you can find his work on Al Jazeera, on the Huffington Post, on CNN, BBC, NPR, Russia Today, and the History Channel. So without further ado, I'd like to ask my brother Haroon to come up and present.
I ordered all 4 Starbucks beverages. As you can see, as proof, these are all mine. I will pass them on. This is not awkward at all. Mine's the chai, because I'm the real South Asian. That was for Wajahat. Good evening. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for putting this together, Tahira, Babar, everyone else who made it happen. And of course, to Hind and Wajahat, Imam Suhaib, it's an honor to be here. I was asked to answer a question, does religion still matter? When I was 19, I found myself in Medina, which is a city in Western Arabia. It is a city famous to Muslims because it is the city where the Prophet Muhammad found refuge in the year 622 and rebuilt a community after years of persecution in Mecca. He died and he was buried in his home, which is now the centerpiece of a mosque that fits upwards of several 100,000 people. It's one of the larger structures in the world. At the age of 19, I found myself at the front end of the mosque where the Prophet Muhammad is buried. I was standing here, and directly in front of me was his grave. From my left hip and on, farther than I could see, seemed like half the Muslim world had showed up with the express purpose of running me over in order to take the place that I was standing in. So I had maybe a 10-second window in which I could reflect on where I found myself. And strangely, I found myself reflecting not on the fact that the Prophet Muhammad, who Muslims believe is the last prophet, was buried maybe 10 feet from where I stood, but that there were 2 people next to him, Abu Bakr and Umar. Abu Bakr was the Prophet Muhammad's best friend. So before the Prophet knew he was a prophet, and on afterwards, through his whole life, Abu Bakr and the Prophet Muhammad were like this, right? They were like best friends. Umar, however, the second of the 2 who were buried beside Prophet Muhammad, was a person who became a Muslim on the very day that he set out to kill the Prophet Muhammad. That he had decided on behalf of his people that he would put an end to this religious heresy called Islam by simply taking his sword, finding the Prophet Muhammad, and killing him. And in the course of that day, he ends up doing a 180 and becomes a Muslim. And I thought how odd it was that a man who was on the verge of killing someone is now buried next to that person. And for the millions of people who come pouring through that mosque to pay their respects, they cannot do so without also paying their respects to that man. That was the last thing I thought about, because then I was basically run over. My spiritual reverie was cut short. I want you to remember that, though, because I'm going to come back to it. Does religion still matter? I decided to answer with a yes or a no, and I'm going to say no. And I will tell you why. Somebody is unhappy. It's okay. One makes enemies in this space. If anyone attacks me, it'll be good for my writing career, so we'll work something out later. So you can write a bad book, but if someone attacks you for your book, sales go up. That's how bad the writing market is. Anyone here ever read White Noise? Novel? Yeah? Yes? Bonnie has read it. How you doing? White Noise is a novel in which the characters are gripped by a fear of death. It's centered around a guy named Jack Gladney. Jack Gladney is the founder of a field called Hitler Studies. He is a man who has made it his mission to understand Adolf Hitler in a way that no other discipline in American academia has, although he does not actually speak German, read it or write it or anything. The novel, nevertheless, is undergirded by a fear of death and the extent to which people will go to avoid their inevitable fate. Marx had a line, it's an absolutely brilliant line, where he says the bourgeoisie are chased by capital around the world, which I thought was a beautiful image. Because what he's saying, in effect, is not that the bourgeoisie are setting the terms for capitalism, is that capitalism is setting the terms. And that people are forced to leave everything behind and constantly overturn their world in the search for profit. And in a weird way, this is what's happening in white noise, right? Characters are driven beyond themselves because of this fear of death. And at the end of the book, Jack Gladney finds himself in a hospital. He's been shot, and he's in the care of a Catholic nun, actual nun, who's a lot older than him. And he says, "Oh my God, thank you, you're here. You actually believe in God, because I don't believe in God, and I don't know anyone who believes in God, but you believe, and I'm so happy that you believe. Because that means someone believes, and as long as someone believes, we as a society are okay." And she flips out. She says, are you stupid? Are we stupid? And at this point, he's devastated. He's like, wait, what is happening here, right? And she says, "Why should I believe what you think is stupid to believe? Of course I don't believe in God." So he kind of does a double take. He's like, "Yeah, but you're a nun." She's like, "Look, I understand that in order for me to do what I do, I have to make it look like I believe in God. But I don't actually believe. My belief is simply to make people like you feel better. But why should I believe in something that you don't even want to believe?" And to me, this indicates a trajectory in American and Western culture, which is going to inevitably affect the wider world, including the Muslim majority world. And that is one in which it is becoming increasingly easy to conceive of a world in which God and religion traditionally conceived do not play a substantive role. We've probably all heard the expression, "there are no atheists in foxholes." Christopher Hitchens, who passed away some years ago, his last collection of essays for Vanity Fair was published under the title Mortality. And it is a series of essays, vignettes, in which he paints his struggle with a cancer that ultimately defeats him. It is, in effect, him telling a story about how he comes to terms with the fact that he is going to die, and his consciousness, this brief flicker of awareness in the vast span of universal time, will simply disappear, and there is nothing after that. And whether you think that's stubbornness or mulish pride or some kind of courage, it does take some kind of spine to believe that and hold to that in the face of your extinction. That I, as a person, will stop existing. And that's it. Eventually, no one will remember me. My legacy will be erased. Anything I have contributed to or accomplished will also be erased. Christopher Hitchens was, for lack of a better term, an atheist in a foxhole. Now, Foucault says in The Order of Things that ideas only become thinkable at a certain time and place. I would play with that a little bit and say that ideas are only receivable in a certain time and place. We've heard about the rise of the new atheists, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, right? The reason they find an audience is because we as a culture, I think, have reached a point where it is easier and easier for us to embrace the idea of a world in which God no longer plays a defining role. Does that make sense? That the fire in the fireplace, the warmth that religion provided, is gone. The embers are cooling. And no matter how much you may want to believe that that is true, you cannot bring yourself to believe in something if in your heart or in your mind you believe it's a cop-out. And for many people, faith, theology, and the sacred are a form of cop-out. And so they will refuse to believe in the divine or in transcendence or anything beyond the material because they think it's a cop-out. Now, there are all kinds of reasons and ways in which religion is changing. But the most interesting statistic to me is that the fastest growing religious category in the United States are the nones. Agnostic, atheist, secular humanist, however you want to define it. But what is happening is a shift. And I'm not interested in answering this question yes or no in a blanket sense. I am interested in answering this question in terms of momentum. Where are we going culturally? Where are we going spiritually? Where are we going cognitively? And for people who define themselves by faith, this means that the world which is approaching will be one in which the idea of orienting your life around God will become more and more ridiculous. Harder and harder to sustain. Now, I think a lot of Muslims are allowed to get away with religiosity in public spaces because we are still seen as a minority, and there is a certain freedom in being a minority, but there is also a lot of condescension. You are essentially foreign, so you are allowed to hold to primitive beliefs. If American Muslims turn mainstream, and they are moving in that direction, then they will be subjected to the same kind of critiques that are emerging out of centers of cultural production. And frankly, I do not see a robust response in defense of theism that is capable of standing up in the near term to this shift. If you look at the Muslim majority world, it's even worse. The collapse of Islamism, the reversal for now of the Arab Spring, the Egyptian coup, the cravenness and complicity of religious scholars such as Ali Goma, who are basically endorsing what is murder, for lack of a better term, right? Politically sanctioned, state-sanctioned murder, however you want to look at it, right? This is the collapse of religion as a moral discourse. And I have serious issues with Islamism, but the fact that Islamism is dying means that there's almost nothing left to take its place. Where are the scholars? Where are the institutions? Where are the ideas that will emerge to fill this vast middle ground composed of people who are increasingly morally exhausted by religion and religiosity? Because it seems to presage very little other than tension and strife and violence. I study Pakistan. It's very clear that this is what's been happening in Pakistan for quite some time. I recently spent about a year in the Middle East. The most notable phenomenon to me was the rise of outright atheism among young Muslims in the Middle East, especially in places like Saudi Arabia and Iran, but increasingly in places like Egypt and Turkey and Pakistan. It's not surprising. I just think that in the Muslim majority world, there are fewer conceptual tools right now to deal with this. What I want to conclude with, because I think I'm going over time, I don't know where I stand on time. I don't even believe in time. The real question is, does timing matter? And it only matters in romance. Nothing else. We can talk about that later. I just said that. Imam Suhaib's got the world's largest caffeinated beverage in his hand, so he doesn't care. So he seriously doesn't even care. He's not even listening. No idea. Wajahat is too cool for school. Wajahat works for the enemy, Al Jazeera, so I work for Al Arabiya. They do real journalism. We destroy real journalism. I can't say that about it. Oh my God, I just did. And I no longer work for Al Arabiya. Dahra, can I have a job? I think for people who take religion seriously as traditionally conceived, it's an interesting time. I think the next few decades are going to be extremely challenging. They will present a kind of opportunity. They will present a terrible burden. But ultimately, they are a kind of reality. And if you refuse to acknowledge reality, reality has a way of forcing itself to be acknowledged. What this means is that as faith commitments become harder and harder to hold to in cognitive senses and experiential senses, as religion becomes more and more of an individual choice and less supported by frames of appreciating and apprehending the world, then religion becomes harder and harder to hold on to. It's a kind of vicious circle. But there is a kind of liberation in it, because you are forced to ask yourself why you do what you do. One of the greatest things about the rise of atheism is that it forces us to ask what religion is really about. And for me, ultimately, Islam is not about praying or fasting or how you dress. These are all incidental. The purpose of Islam is establishing and maintaining and cultivating a relationship with the divine that improves who you are as a person and puts you more closely in touch with who you were meant to be and created as. The centerpiece of Islam, without which it can never stand, is the divine. The idea that God is outside and separate from existence. Not in the kind of caricature that Richard Dawkins pretends God is, which is usually a caricature of a caricature. Not a bearded man on a cloud, which is a New Yorker cartoon. But that initial and pure oneness, which gives existence to creation, but is itself not creation. The divine. And when I was standing in Medina for those few seconds, it occurred to me, why do people believe? At the time, I did not believe in God. Which is ironic because I was in Medina, standing in front of the grave of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But I didn't. And I thought to myself, had I believed for a long time, because hundreds of millions, if not billions of people believed, And yet, if you look at who is next to him in those two graves, Abu Bakr and Umar, they both date to a time when religion was a radical choice, a deeply unpopular choice, the choice for which one could get into trouble. And they chose to believe not because of the pressures of people around them, but in spite of and against those pressures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Haroon. I hope you guys are thinking about your questions that you would like them to answer. Our next speaker is Wajahat Ali, and we actually asked him to share with us his ideas about religion and the vernacular, and really thinking about why is it that a lot of people are becoming disjointed from religion in the sort of postmodern world. I don't know whether he's going to directly answer these questions, but I know that what he will say will be very interesting and thought-provoking. He's an award-winning playwright of this wonderful play called The Domestic Crusaders. It's one of the first major plays about the American Muslim experience and is published by McSweeney's. His focus is really on thinking about what is the narrative of American Muslims and of Muslims worldwide, and to that end, he's a lawyer and a TV personality. He's or he will be known as a TV personality really, really soon. He is also the lead author of the investigative report Fear Inc., The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America. He currently can be seen on Al Jazeera America as the co-host of the stream. And without further ado, I'd like to have Wajahat come up.
Assalamu alaikum. Just to let you know, we did a religious pilgrimage to something called Devon Street earlier today, where we engaged in an epic battle with someone called Khan Barbecue. We annihilated and were annihilated by Khan Barbecue. So if it seems like Imam Suhaib, myself, and Haroon are lost in deep thought, no. We're in an epic food coma, and we're trying to figure out in the green room why we went to Khan Barbecue and ate a feast an hour before a huge epic conference on this religion matter. Thank you, Tara, for hosting us and for taking us there and for paying for a meal. Very chivalrous. Thank you, Hind, for coming all the way from Austria. Why would you come all the way from Austria for this? Stay in Austria. Thank you, Northwestern, for inviting us for this awesome, intellectually stimulating conversation, hopefully. Are you guys still with us? Did Haroon blow your mind? Or are you still? Okay, you guys are still with us? Okay. And I'm honored to be essentially the brown mushroom in between the Imam Suhaib Haroon sandwich. That's basically my role. I offer little nutrients. I'm not really that necessary, but hopefully for some people it can be kind of tasty. The question they asked me to answer in 20 minutes or less is the following. Does religion still function? Does it function well? Do people in postmodernity feel inspired by it? Why are people disjointed from their faith or the idea of faith itself? He, Wajahat Ali, speaking about myself in the third person, will also comment on faith and radicalization. What leads people to that extreme? Thank you, Tahara. All right. So I wrote down some words for you to earn my honorarium today. First of all, when speaking about religion, what is religion after all? Here's an attempt at one of the many definitions. Religion is a language that defines a path guiding human beings on their superhero spiritual quest to meet the divine. In the context of religion's function, maybe we need some new postmodern, I think a word that Haroon used, analogies for religion. So if religion in the postmodern world was a smartphone application, it would be iPhone's Apple Maps. It's glitchy, frustrating, masochistic, confusing, and leads you totally in the wrong direction. If religion was a family member, it would be that weird, creepy, molesty uncle who stares at you and that no one else knows in the family except the elders, and he just keeps staring at you in a weird, creepy, molesty way while eating pakoras. If religion was a lover, it would be Christian Grey from the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy. It tells you it loves you as it abuses you and ties you up and purrs sick, deviant thoughts in your ear. And by the way, all the sex scenes are blurred out thanks to the Saudi religious police and the local Chicago Hyderabadi Rishtantis. If religion was an elected official, it would be the self-destructive, crack-smoking mayor of Canada, Rob Ford, with all of the unintentional YouTube clips included. If religion was a disease, it would be herpes, stuck with you for life, highly embarrassing and intermittently causing pain. If religion was an 80s action star, it would be Chuck Norris, once relevant, but now a walking mockery of itself, unaware that it is the punchline and people are laughing at him, not with him. See, according to the latest research, as Hind talked about, religion, whatever that is, in America is not functioning well at all, especially for the millennials, most of you guys. Millennials are much less likely to state a religious preference than the elders. Here's some numbers. In 1972, 5% of people answered no to religion. In 1990, 8%. In 2012, anyone want to guess the percentage? I heard nothing. 20%. A record number of 18 to 24-year-olds say they now prefer no religion. 32%. All right? According to all the studies. However, here's the interesting part to me. According to the Gallup poll, belief in God has not changed over the past 2 decades. Let that sink in for a second. So, people are still seeking something called God, but they are not seeking religion or religious institutions. However, they are still on a quest and journey to meet something sacred, something divine. But they are abandoning quote-unquote religion and seeking a new language or at least a new religious translation. They are becoming unchurched, untempled, unsynagogued, and unmosqued. This is a phenomenon. And honestly, who can blame them? Instead of being open houses of worship that nurture the spirit, many feel most of these buildings have become walls without a soul, providing a roof without spiritual shelter. Religion, instead of being used as a shield against pain and ugliness, is now a self-isolating cocoon, an Elysium, pop culture reference, and there was a Pakistani president in that movie, by the way. I continue. It has become an Elysium for the elite, who are elected by the length of their beards, the pompous beating of their chests, the loud, incessant braying of takbirs, and the steady supply of contagious takfirs. Instead of being a sword to help slay injustice and oppression and inequality and the base desires of the nafs, the soul, the religion, the self-commanding soul, religion has become a self-righteous weapon to justify slaying our enemies that often include fellow travelers who believe in God but have the audacity to refer to him or her or it by another name, who instead of praying like Arabic Tai Chi, sometimes throw a Hail Mary or several Hail Marys, or recite an Om Shanti Om, or kneel instead of prostrate. And speaking about haram, we got to get in some haram and bidah shirt here. Speaking about haram, if you have breasts, you have already failed the test. You are spiritually demoted. Go downstairs in the mosque or go behind the wall. And once you're there, bum rush the small corner that will give you the luxurious 1 foot of space to prostrate so you can barely avoid headbutting the auntie in front of you while you're going in sujood. And if you're gay, it's not your day. Today or any day or every day. Just stay in the closet, way back behind the blinged out sequin shalwar kameez and in between the Taliban chief and John Travolta. And if you're black, go back. And if you're brown, you're going down, unless you're a specific type of brownness that helped fund and build the mosque for your specific fellow browns who share your income bracket and your same upper middle class profession and your same consistency of particular brownness. And if you're yellow, whatever, stay mellow. And if you're white, you're all right. You guys still with me? All right. The research and studies and surveys show that millennials feel disconnected from this function, this language, this thing called religion. This thing has become too compartmentalized, too narrow, too prejudiced, and too quote-unquote unwelcoming. If you're like, I'm going to drop 80s pop culture references all day, all right? Super Mario Brothers? Do the kids know? Do the millennials know this thing called Super Mario Brothers? Who doesn't know Super Mario Brothers? Raise your hand.
your parents have failed you, punch yourself in the face. All right. If you are like Super Mario Brothers on a spiritual quest, religion, instead of being your partner, your Luigi, your Toad, your princess, that is supposed to help you on your spiritual quest, it has instead become Bowser, King Koopa, your ultimate end-level boss, who ironically and tragically stands between you and your spiritual destination. But perhaps this is nothing new. Perhaps this is not a postmodern crisis. These problems have existed during the time of the cavemen. Yes, even the Neanderthals, with their primitive minds, their loincloth, their clubs, their Geico commercials, even they sought the divine and the sacred, and they expressed themselves through art. Cave paintings were the original religious texts. And thousands of years ago, shepherds and carpenters in the Middle East lost themselves in the deserts, where they ended up finding themselves and their God. And even now, many sit here, men and women in front of me, from the west to the east, in oft misunderstood and oft abused terms, I don't know what they mean, voluntarily seeking a relationship, a journey, a quest for the sacred and the divine. Humankind's postmodern dilemmas are essentially the same pre-modern dilemmas of the past. Loneliness, fear of exile, fear of not belonging, fear of not being loved, and trying to find meaning and fulfillment in an insane and absurd world born from madness and cruel humor. The irony is the postmodern human tweets, retweets, hashtags, uploads, downloads, Instagrams, Pinterest, YouTubes, plus ones, blogs, tumbles, and even pokes. We are connected and plugged in 24/7. We have tweets, we have friends, we have followers, we have fans. We share and voyeur every aspect of our lives and your lives 24/7. And the great tragedy and irony remains that people feel more lonely and isolated now than at any other time in modern history. And human beings, by virtue of our design or creation, are creatures of imitation and community, despite our best attempts at pure individualism and suburban or urban isolation. We are not islands unto ourselves. We exist and learn and survive by depending on one another. And religion, whatever this thing religion is, despite all its warts and its problems and its scabs and lacerations and boils and traumas, still inspires and invites many people because it has the ability to provide a language for the spiritual seeker, a path to walk upon, a model to follow for those seeking an opportunity to dance, to jam, to whirl, if ever so briefly, with the sacred and divine. And this is why I'll be a little bit personal, is why I'm a believer. For those of you who don't know, I'm Muslim. I choose to be Muslim. Because for me, although you can choose to deny the existence of Allah and doubt that he, she, it, them exists, you cannot deny the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He lived, and he breathed, and he walked, and he sought, and he journeyed. And for some of us, by our choice, he gave us a spiritual path that we follow. And speaking about death, the grand party that does not discriminate and invites everyone, I will briefly share a near-death experience because I want to be a cliche. Almost 2 years ago, give or take a week, actually 8 days. 2 years ago, I almost had my near-death experience, right? I woke up with my back on the floor of 24-hour fitness with my legs spread apart, wearing my Mervyn's oversized workout shorts and my high tops, with a 19-year-old 24-hour fitness lady looking essentially at my crotch, staring at me, which was awkward. I was sweating profusely, and there were people hovering around me, and my heart rate was at 225 beats per minute. I had passed out. I had a condition which I once fixed, and my heart rate went to 225 minutes as I was running on the treadmill. I passed out. I woke up. Once you pass out and wake up, usually your heart resets itself. Not this time. The paramedics came. They pumped me full of drugs. It was supposed to take care of me. My heart rate was still 230. All right, they waited a half hour. I'm now in resting position. They take me to the hospital that, alhamdulillah, was across the road. I'm sitting there sweating, afro, white wife beater shirt, Mervyn's, black workout pants, white fob high tops. In the gurney, they take me in. I'm really calm and cool because, what can you do? But everyone else's face, they were terrified. They keep me in there. They pump me full of drugs. Everything's supposed to be cool. Nope, heart rate still 225 to 240. All right. So now they do something called cardioversion. Anyone here pre-med? Cardioversion is basically defibrillation. You guys see those movies, 1, 2, 3, clear? All right? So like, all right, Wajahat, we're going to give you drugs, you're going to pass out, you're not going to feel a thing. I wake up when they're saying clear. All right? So who has been cardioverted here before? Anyone? One person. This is how it feels like. Imagine swallowing an angry young mule. Okay? The mule turns its face towards your back, digs its hind legs in, and kicks out. Kind of like the alien chest burster. So they're like, I'm like, hey, what's going on? Clear. Everything's supposed to be cool. Guess what? Heart rate's still at 240. They cardiovert me again. They put me on drugs. They say, Wajahat, you won't feel a thing. Don't worry about it. I'm like, cool. I wake up. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Clear. Boom. Nothing happens. My heart rate's still at 230. Now it's been like almost an hour that my heart rate's at 230 resting. They do it a third time. Same thing. I'm like, hey guys, clear, boom. I'm like, F my life. This sucks. Then they start pumping me full of drugs again, but now I start coughing out phlegm. What happens is I'm getting something called pulmonary edema because there's water coming in my lungs. Your body's drowning in itself, right? Now everyone's freaked out. The doctor, who looked like an Eastern European version of Danny DeVito, like tiny, crazy hair, bushy eyebrows. True story. He looks afraid, and everyone around me looks terrified. And it was at that moment when, internally, I didn't feel good, right? I'm like, wow, this is kind of strange. I'll share this part. I've written the rest, but I'll share this part because I haven't shared it with anyone. It was at that moment where then you're like, this is it. Like that's when you have this, if you will, I don't know if anyone's been in this situation, you have what I call this negotiation with God. All right, it goes like this. All right, okay. All right, give me more time, I'll be a doper person. I swear to God. I'll work out more. I don't know why that's important. I'll be nicer to my mom. I'll go to the homeless shelter more. I'll make up all my Fajr prayers. Okay, let's do a barter. And you think the universe owes you more life, right? So you have this conversation, this negotiation, you do this barter system. The heart rate's still racing, more phlegm's coming out, people are looking more afraid. You're like, okay, time's running out. Then you start doing an audit of your life. You're like, oh my God, I wasted my life. Why did I play so many video games? Damn you, Super Mario. I should have done Hajj. I was too poor to do Hajj. That's because I was too lazy. I should have worked harder. Then you start thinking about your family. You're like, all right, I'm going to go. How is this going to affect my family? I hope my parents are okay. And then at the end, when you really feel like you're going to go, because things got really bad. Phlegm was coming out. I was not feeling well. My whole room was filled with the doctors and nurses. And you really think, all right, that's class. Time's up. And in those final moments, I instinctively, I do not know why I did this, I just started reciting prayers. Ayatul Kursi, Surah Fatiha. I did my khuls, because I'm hydro, I say khuls. Right? Anyone here is hydro? Okay, thank you. Wow, huge hydro condition. I did my 4 khuls, Ayatul Kursi, I was reciting the Quran. And in those last moments, I turned to God through this language of Islam, a religion that I grew up with, and voluntarily decided to use as a path towards my ultimate spiritual destination. And I felt comforted in those final moments to know that perhaps I was not alone, that there was something more powerful than me that would nurture me and embrace me beyond this life. And in those final moments and beyond, and maybe it was a delusion, and maybe it's a crutch, and maybe it was madness, but it fulfilled me and it gave me hope and it comforted me. And in those final moments, that was enough. That was enough. And you might say, okay, good and dandy, kumbaya, fulfillment, cliched, near-death story, white tunnels, Hallmark, commercials, cotton candy, blah, blah, blah. But Wajahat, what about Anwar Awlaki and the Rage Boys? What about the underwear bomber and the Taliban, the wife beaters and the Woolwich murderers, the 19 hijackers and the Boston bombing brothers, the Christian white supremacists and the right-wing Hindu zealots, the Burmese Buddhists who are forcing the Rohingya Muslim out of Dodge, and the extremist Sunnis bombing the Shias out of Pakistan, and the Sunnis and Shias killing each other in Iraq and Lebanon, and on and on and on as the world turns and burns. What about those guys? And to answer the final part of the question, according to the MI5 British Intelligence Agency report, Muslim terrorists in the West, quote, are a diverse collection of individuals fitting no distinct profile or typical pathway to extremism. In the words of Olivier Roy, a French scholar in Islamic studies, the process of violent radicalization has little to do with religious practice. In fact, most Muslim fundamentalists, quote-unquote fundamentalists, are religious novices. And there is, quote, evidence that a well-established religious identity actually protects against violent radicalization, and this is similar for most religious communities. A bearded man in a cave named Osama cites religion as a justification to fuel his still-burning holy war, and a bearded man in Konya, Turkey named Rumi cites religion as his poetic muse to fuel his burning desire and love for the divine. How is this dichotomy possible? According to the data for the extremists, their religion is a function of their hate and pride, instead of their hate and pride being a function of their religion. The same could be said for politics. These are examples of how men and women choose to use religion, either as a language of love or a language of hate. A language that justifies the use of violence in furtherance of their ideology, or on the flip side, using it as a poetic language that seeks to love and be loved by the divine, which in turn inspires the capacity to love all. At the end, religion, like Haroon said, is a choice. To be on a spiritual quest or a journey is still a choice. And it seems millennials are still choosing the spiritual quest but opting out of, quote-unquote, this thing called religion. And at the end, all of our choices are deeply personal, and how ironic and oddly beautiful that all of our different choices as humans are still mostly inspired by the same shared needs. The needs for love, the need to be loved, the need for community, and the need for belonging. I'm ending it now, I promise. Are you guys still with me? All right. So does religion still matter and function? I'll give a personal story. If I had to end on an analogy, for me, let me end with Lord of the Rings. Who here does not know Lord of the Rings? You have failed as a human being, and may God or gods forgive you. For me, I'm just kidding, by the way. Not really. For me, religion ultimately helps me in my spiritual quest to unload my nafs, my ego, at Mordor, and return pure back to the Shire or the Undying Lands. If indeed Shire or the Undying Lands is my Jannat, my paradise in this world and the next, then the fiery doomed pits of Mordor are my struggle with the dunya, the material world, and my nafs, my spiritual ego, that pushes me, goads me, tricks me, burdens me, and tempts me every day towards embracing and becoming my inner Gollum. See, growing up, when I was a millennial back in the day, and you grow old real quick, soon you will look like this. And you'll make pop cultural references, and an audience will stare at you with vacant eyes. Growing up, I had the foolhardy, arrogant delusion that I was pure-hearted and decent like Frodo and Sam. But now I'm jaded, hairy, more bald, and I've made peace with the fact that I'm more like the conflicted, terrified, lonely, sniveling, but somewhat good-hearted Smeagol. Religion for me functions as an inspiration to continue on my spiritual journey and gives me the language to articulate and increase my hope, desire, capacity to love, and inshallah be loved by the divine, and in turn hopefully reflect that love to and for those around me, whether they be mosqued or unmosqued, churched or unchurched, synagogued or unsynagogued, and yada yada yada, and everything between and beyond and above and underneath and inside and seen and hidden. At the very least, although it might not help me in achieving the apex of masculine potency of Aragorn, or the Adonis beauty of Legolas, or the kind-hearted selflessness of Sam, at the very least, religion keeps me from becoming my own Gollum. And for me, that's why religion still matters. Thanks for your time.
Thank you to Wajahat. So we heard from a sociologist about religion as being a source of warmth that is cooling off now in an age of answers. We just heard from a news analyst and cultural commentator about the language that religion has to offer and how it sometimes needs to change to remain relevant toward people. And now we will be hearing from a religious scholar who will be answering the question or discussing the questions of why is faith important and what is the role of religion and spirituality. How does religion inform our being and what are the benefits of that? And we are going to be hearing lastly but not leastly from Imam Suhaib Webb, who is the Imam of the Islamic Society of the Boston Cultural Center. He converted to Islam in 1992 and has served as the Imam and resident scholar in various communities across the country. Imam Suhaib is a graduate of Al-Azhar University and served as the head of the English translation department at Dar al-Iftah al-Masriya as a mufti, which just means jurist, nothing scary. He was named as one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world, and his website, www.suhaibweb.com, was voted the best blog of the year in 2009 by the Breast Crescent Awards. And I would like to ask him to come join us and share with us your thoughts. Thank you very much to Imam Suhaib Webb, to Wajahat Ali, and to Haroon Moghul. We do have some time for questions from the audience, and as those are coming up to me, I have a question for our three panelists, and I would appreciate maybe one of you could answer it if you want to jump into it, or perhaps all of you would like to answer it. I'd also like to, aside from being the only woman on the stage, I believe I'm the only person of African descent on the stage. And I remember watching a short clip a few weeks ago from the comedian Kamal Bell, who had Jamie Kilstein, who's an atheist, and John Fugelsang, who is of Catholic background and, let's say, a believer, but maybe not in the institution. And the three of them were discussing kind of atheism and why atheism, right? Does God exist? And that question. At one point, the host, who's Kamal, who's African American, said, as an African American, I think that atheism is actually the highest form of white privilege. That as an African American, I'm waking up every day and I think, wait a minute, you're telling me there's no God? All right, I'm going to go back to sleep. So my question to the three of you, or any of you who feels compelled to answer, is this question that we're thinking about today, does religion still matter? Is that a question that is relevant to people outside of your own identity group? Well-educated, Generation Xers / millennial, although I don't know if any of you are actually millennials. Does this particular question, is it relevant for people who are, don't have the luxury of thinking about it in the way that you have been thinking about it?
Hello. Yeah, I think to some degree it's a question of luxury, but I'm going to qualify that. But I think that liberalism can sometimes be the worst form of parochialism because it is blind to its own parochialism. Many liberal intellectuals believe that globalization is just the expansion of themselves into the rest of the world. It's the latest iteration of colonialism. It has very little room for meaningful difference of opinion. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of Muslims who identify with the left. I am hesitant to identify with the left on a substantive level because I see serious problems within a lot of leftist conversations around claims of transcendence and the sacred. That said, I spent a year in the Middle East, and many Iranians, Saudis, Egyptians, Turks, Pakistanis have been deeply frustrated by the effect of religion in their societies. Many of them themselves are deeply religious. I think this actually gets to Imam Suhaib's point. I think one thing we've seen is a collapse in the belief in our own moral common sense. That we should be able to distinguish right and wrong without the benefit of serious religious training, right? I mean, the kinds of things that come out of some people's mouths in the name of religion can be opposed without necessarily having training in religion. Like, that's just stupid. But sometimes we need the people who are opposing it are themselves religious. So obviously it's a conflation. But I think that, in some ways it's a question of privilege. And the third point I would just say is that what is produced culturally in the United States affects the rest of the world. So whether or not it is a question of privilege, it's not a question anyone can avoid. You guys want?
No, also to add to that, I think the role of the imams now is like tech support, honestly, in this world. and I'm a little out of it tonight, so forgive me, but I think what I'm seeing a lot of times in our community when I came back to the States is that outside of, I don't think it's just, I think liberalism is definitely the problem of liberalism is, intolerance in the name of tolerance, which you're speaking to, right? Keep it at that level maybe for people. But even within our own communities, if you talk to people who are outside of maybe the sphere that Hind is talking about, the assumption that they don't think the way that other people think, or they think at that high level, I think is a problem. But most people who come into my office have either suffered from spiritual abuse. People have made them feel that they're inadequate. They're not able to think about God on their own, which I think is very unhealthy. Or secondly, they bought into spiritual abuse, and they are actually defending it. So I think for the masses of the people, though, they just need, and this is going to sound bad, they just want to know how to get to God. Once Imam Razi, I was walking in the streets of the city, and people greeted him. He was a great scholar, a great theologian, and people greeted him, and they were, like you greet, say, Derek Rose or something. And this old woman said, "Who's that man?" I said to her, "He's a great scholar. He has 100 proofs for the existence of God." She said, "He's an idiot. If he has 100 proofs for God, it means he had 100 doubts." So oftentimes the simple people can teach us. I had a teacher in Egypt once who I came to was crying. He's a great scholar, and I asked him, "Why are you crying?" He said, "I learned repentance from a common person. I learned about the benevolence of God." So I was going to talk about this as well, that we need the model of a learning mosque, a learning imam, a learning pulpit. There's a reciprocal between theology, a reciprocation between theology and sociology. Theology without sociology is a cult. Right? So I don't know if I agree with kind of the question that people outside of that sphere, they might have different concerns that are equally as important, but just articulated in a different way.
Yes, I have one question. And each of you has the microphones also. These ones. So I'd actually like to pose this question to you, Haroon. And of course, either Imam Suhaib or Wajahat can also answer. But part of the reason religion seems to be declining in importance is that people no longer rely on metaphysicists to explain the world. Can there be religion without a metaphysical belief in the angels, jinn, heaven, hell, Satan, etc.? Can there be an ethics of religion without metaphysics?
How many of you guys have seen Oblivion? Movie, Tom Cruise? Raise your hand, it's okay. Actually raise your hand, that's it. You can have your friend raise your hand for you since you're a college student and it's hard to do that. It's okay, don't be embarrassed. I think Oblivion should be mandatory viewing for every Sunday school in America. Because I think it is the most powerful representation of the Muslim worldview I've ever seen. And I'm being 100% serious. There's two characters. They believe themselves to be on a mission, one of whom discovers information that this mission may not actually be what it appears to be. That would be Tom Cruise. This gets to the definition of kufr, what it means to deny the truth after you have recognized it, which in the Islamic tradition is sort of the great sin. Not to not believe, but to obscure truth upon the recognition of it. His colleague would prefer that things continue as they are, because she cannot bring herself to face up to the implications of this discovery. He is raised, Tom Cruise, within power, and then asked to subvert it. He is Moses in the house of Pharaoh. And at the end of the movie, he is confronted with a scene that anyone who's familiar with the Muslim tradition will know intimately, where a figure says to him, "Anna rabbukum al-a'la," I am your Lord Most High, which is what Pharaoh said to the children of Israel. His response is a different kind of aqidah, perhaps, but nevertheless is a response to the arrogation to oneself of powers that belong only to the divine. Wajahat mentioned Rumi. Rumi's Masnavi begins with a Bayt Sher, Beshna az neshun hikayat mikoned, az jidai ha shikayat mikoned. Listen to the neigh, it has a complaint. It sings the song of separation. Rumi was an Islamic scholar from the dominant civilization of his time. He was not a person of color. He was not a minority. He was, so to speak, the man. Because for 1,000 years, Islam was the dominant cultural order in much of the planet. And Islam was therefore inflected by this. The reason I mention this very briefly is because Rumi found at the heart of his worldview this idea of sadness and complaint and separation. It is impossible for materiality to suffice the human being because you are not material creatures. Worldviews that do not recognize the divine will end inevitably in exhaustion. Because, and this is my belief, you can disagree with it, we are not creatures that can be fully sufficed except with the divine in our lives. It is impossible to avoid religious questions in the same way that it is impossible to avoid sexual questions or psychological questions or economic questions or political questions. These are all part of who we are as human beings. And I don't know if that answers the question. I tried.
Thank you. This is a question that I like to pose to Wajahat because I can. I'm the moderator. Is it possible to blend into the American scenery while still physically identifying as Muslim? Does blending in or being American mean not identifying as Muslim through hijab or a beard? Is it possible, and is it wrong or unrealistic to want to be both?
I like the swagger with which Hind asked that question. Very impressive. I do look. What is my identity, right? I was born in Fremont, California, to Pakistani immigrant parents. My first language was Urdu. I didn't speak English until I was 5 years old. When I went to preschool, because my parents thought it would be hilarious to send their son to preschool without telling you that you're going to preschool, or teaching him English, I only knew 3 words of English, which were the following, true story. Shut up. Idiot. And for those of you old enough, you know, oh, spaghetti-o. Which is remember that? But I used to say, because I was a FOB kid, oh, pasghetti-o. All right. Shut up, idiot, oh, pasghetti-o. Kid speaking Urdu, born and raised in the United States of America, right, who had lentil stains on his white shirt growing up. The only left-handed person in his family, because I'm a jinn, apparently. And they literally, my grandmother used to tie my hand behind my back, and my mom used to throw tennis balls at me, thinking that I would, it's not abuse at all, it's very normal. Thinking that I would catch the ball with my right hand. And my chachi was alive at the time, was studying to be a doctor. He comes in and sees this fat kid with lentil stains, with tennis balls bouncing off his chest, stubbornly trying to unleash his left hand from captivity. And he's like, I'm translating from Urdu, he goes, let it go. Let it go. He's left-handed. You know, the only token Muslim at all boys Jesuit Catholic high school, Bellarmine College Prep, where my friends sometimes in elementary school thought it'd be a fun joke to put bacon bits in my salad to see if I would eat them and go to hell, which is kind of hilarious. But back in the day, you know, I used to get angry and chase them, but I was fat, so I couldn't catch up with them. But the point I'm trying to say is, like, if I take away, look, so I'm Muslim because I proclaim my Muslim identity. I have the blue passport, the Willy Wonka golden ticket. I'm American, all right? Gold in some countries to this day, and my family's Pakistani. So we could say I have a multi-hyphenate identity of being American Muslim of Pakistani descent, or Pakistani American Muslim, or Muslim Pakistani American. What am I? There's this messy little identity, right? And if I want to take away my Pakistani side, do I chop off my stomach? If I want to take away my American side, do I rip out my tongue? If I want to take away my Muslim side, do I rip off my heart? Right? Like they say, eliminate your Pakistani side. I'm like, should I give up my fobby hair? What I'm trying to say is, our existence, okay, whoever asked that question, is proof that you are this messy, multi-hyphenated identity that is able to reconcile all these allegedly conflicting cultures and house them elegantly in one body. You are walking proof that there is no clash of inherent civilizations, that the world and the universe is capable of understanding and appreciating and embracing what is essentially the messy narrative of the human existence. It has always been this way, it is this way, it will be that way. You are the model for all the people who say that a practicing Muslim cannot function in the quote-unquote West, or vice versa. So whenever people ask me these questions, and I'll end on this note, this is actually a much more profound dilemma than people give credit to. Oftentimes Haroon and I have discussions about this, whether or not the articles are right or the words that we do actually have any impact if we waste our lives, and then we go off on these premature midlife crises and it gets depressing. Then we have chai and he has a cookie and I weep. But sometimes when we travel the world, it's always, alhamdulillah, it always gives me these moments, especially in times of self-doubt, when you're really doubting yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Does it affect any positive change whatsoever? Our lives will end, as we say. The grand party is death, and the time that I've spent in my life wouldn't make any difference. And you'll be surprised to know that I went to Singapore and Malaysia back to back. I went to Singapore. There was this Muhajirah Singaporean, is it Singaporean? Muslimah with Pakistani identity who wrote me a handwritten note and said, and I'm just giving a clip notes of the note. She goes, "Thank you so much for your writing and your words. They have served as an inspiration for me my entire life. I've been trying to reconcile the battle between all these identities. I did not have a model, but seeing you write about it and the fact you wrote about it confidently gives me hope. So I really appreciate it." I go to Malaysia, a really intelligent, well-known writer, I won't give his name, comes up to me, takes me out for seafood and says, "Listen, you and Haroon's writing," I told Haroon about this, "you and Haroon Moghul, I really appreciate what you guys wrote." I said, "Why?" He goes, "They gave me hope because I didn't see a vision or a model where I could reconcile these identities. But seeing you guys articulate that and live gives me hope." So I think, yes, proof positive, if you look around this room, is that you don't have to melt into anything. Why melt? I don't want to melt. That sounds terrible. I like my human form, all right? I don't like this whole melting pot. I like this salad approach to America, the salad bowl. Maybe we'll be the eggplant. Maybe I'll be the okra, all right? And I have a place in this multicultural America. I don't need to melt in it. I can stand within it and be proud of my identity and be all of the above, right? And you can't categorize me or compartmentalize me. I won't let you. I hope I answered your question. Is that fine? Okay.
Thank you. We had several questions that are really asking, essentially, how can millennials, how can young people take the experiences of converts, of people who are very, and not only converts, but people who are very confident in their cultural background as Muslims, and their ethnic and their racial background, and how can millennials who are, as Wajahat was saying, have a Pakistani stomach and a Muslim heart or an American tongue or whatever it was, how can people with these sort of multi-ethnic cultural backgrounds, what lessons can they learn from the convert experience? And I would appreciate if Imam Suhaib Webb, if you can take this question and also perhaps discuss, because you yourself have referenced the African American Muslim experience in your response.
I don't think any of us can speak about the African American Muslim experience. I think we should have an African American here to speak about that experience. Then I received a note. I just wanted to comment about the calling women fine and talking about strippers. But that was my life. And I wasn't saying that and then using the fact that I'm an imam to try to intimidate me. This is what I'm talking about, creating a community of intimidation. Whereas if you were to read historic, like Fudail ibn Iyad became Muslim because, and it says in the historical text that the woman was a very beautiful woman. No one would subject Fudail ibn Iyad to that. But I think sometimes for converts, people might misunderstood, what we're talking about. By no means, you know me, I think, well enough to know I'm probably a champion of the anti-patriarchy movement in the community. But I apologize to the woman if my ex-stripper girlfriend was offensive to her. That was just a historical reality that happened to me. I wasn't trying to make people laugh. I actually gave her dawah later on in life, and I think maybe she's now Muslim, inshallah. So I apologize for that, as well as some of the other language. But what's interesting, when you study hadith with our scholars, there's actually a chapter when I was learning to be a mufti on when you can cuss and use bad language. And the Prophet ﷺ in Bukhari, when a man came to him and he said to him, did you F her? It's in Arabic. Ahaniktaha. How many of you speak Arabic? You understand what that means? Ahaniktaha. How would you translate that without saying it? Right? So again, that goes back to the construction of how we see our community vis-a-vis insecurities. And I don't mean to attack that person. I appreciate that nasiha, wallahi. I appreciate it. But it was misunderstood and misplaced. And I didn't want people to laugh about the fact that I dated a woman who used to do that. It was horrible. She was subjected to some of the worst treatment I've ever seen in my life. But that's where I was in my life. That's my story. As far as converts, I think that's a very clear example. The American Muslim convert hasn't really found an identity institutionally. The African American Muslim convert has. If the African American community has been subjected to explicit forms of racism, the white community is subjected to implicit forms of racism that are never talked about. And the community in general, I would say, of converts has yet to have even its own institution. If you were to look at many of the masajid, I mean, you talk about the issue with women, which is profound, right? It becomes even more so for convert women. When you look at many of the dawah, like they have the dawah board or something they have in communities, the dawah group, there's never a convert in the dawah group. Like, why wouldn't there be a convert on the dawah, the propagation group that spreads Islam to local people? So I think one of the challenges, number one, institutional identity that we share in common with you guys. Number two is understanding sometimes our cultural references maybe are seen in a different light than are understood by people. The third thing is that even as imams, sometimes convert imams are like avatars in the community. We're just a convert imams. So I converted 20 years ago. Conversion was an event, Islam is a process. But still now I'm called a convert. Well, no, I converted in November of 1992. This has been like the longest shahada. It's like, yeah, well, don't say that. But some of them were born, right? I mean, really, when Friends was about to start. But the point is that, and that's why even tonight I had trouble kind of getting into a groove, because the direction of this conversation is very different than from what I experienced in my Islam and in my development, in my definition, in my process of changing. So I think institutional participation, I think MSAs are great for converts. It's like amazing. That's where I was lucky to find myself. But then you go out of that and you find that within the larger institutions, you're not really welcome culturally. You're always subjected to being culturally criticized. There's profound loneliness. There's a sense of, I think, when I talk to converts who have left Islam, it's never been for theology, it's for sociology. It's usually because they're suffering from a really profound sense of loneliness. The last issue is the acculturation issue. Where it's interesting, I was at an Impact event, and Dr. Hatot, we all love, was saying, I have a dream one day when there'll be biryani and mansaf on the same table. And I raised my hand and said, and maybe some cornbread and pot roast in the middle. And the fact that, we're always kind of left out of those discussions. Now, the African American Muslim community is even worse because they have an incredible historical legacy. They had the first Islamic schools in America, the Clara Muhammad schools. And it's just no one even acknowledges that, especially in Chicago, of all places. So that's why we named our institute Ella Collins Institute, after Malcolm's sister, who was a woman, African American Muslim in Boston. But I would say the process of acculturation, we go through assimilation then unassimilation, right? Assimilation to Eastern cultural ethos, then back into becoming American again, where the immigrant community is talking about, do we assimilate within the American framework? I don't know about what your generation goes through. Can I respond to that? Yeah. I'll respond from, I think, the perspective of, quote-unquote, the immigrant communities, although I think it's very reductive, but basically, non-white ethnic communities, and I think it ties to the previous question. I think all this is related. You can't speak on behalf of African Americans. I can say non-white. Okay, let's do that. I'll just speak from mine. I'll make it specifically say South Asian, Pakistani American students. When it comes to millennials and my generation, the question I always ask, and Haroon and I talk about this, we talk about this, is if you see Pakistani Americans, right, they love the Suhaib Webbs, the Hamza Yusufs, the Imam Zaids. But there's no Pakistani American equivalent of that. And there was a chaplain who I was talking to recently, and I'm like, how come there isn't that baller Pakistani American? I mean, they're getting there, but I'm who's elevated to that level and looked upon as a model by Pakistanis, right, or Bangladeshis. And they're getting there. I mean, they're getting there, but I would say from our perspective, we defer automatically sometimes, and we make you guys, and we've talked about this, the burden is placed on you, the avatar of perfection, the great white hope, and oftentimes it's seen as because he is authentically American. This is the authentically American Muslim narrative. And I was talking to this chaplain, and I said, bro, what about you? You're a baller, you're in Ivy League school, you're born and raised here, you're married here, you can be as much as that narrative model too. He goes, yeah, but not me, bro. I'm like, why? He goes, I don't know. I'm like, is it because you're Desi? He goes, yeah, it's not, I mean, maybe, yeah, maybe. And it's an image, and what I'm trying to say is, there's profound insecurity that Haroon and I were talking about that I think inflicts our generation, where we don't have those tangible models of success. Right? We don't walk around with humble swagger. We walk around with insecurity. And we project leadership oftentimes, or the authentic Muslim American, with the privileged white face, or even African American. That's authentically American. Denying ourselves our own place in the American narrative. Sorry if I'm trying to be too harsh here. And I think when I was in Turkey with Haroon, we were in the summer there, it was interesting that people walked around with a bit of swagger in Turkey. I mean, they have a good economy around, they have the army, Erdogan, says whatever he wants to say, for better or worse. But what I was realizing as you walk around in Istanbul, there are tangible models of Muslim success. Blue Mosque is right there. Suleiman Masjid is right there. Fatih Masjid is right there. You have Istanbul, which is popping. You have a city that's sitting on two continents, right? And with American Muslims, I think, oftentimes, it goes back to the point that Suhaib Webb was saying, we do victimhood, we don't share our narratives of success, oftentimes. And I think sharing our narrative of success and giving kids a model of success, faith is not enough, faith needs to be attached to something tangible. That's what I realized. For example, when it comes to writing, when it comes to the older generations, they're like, you have a talent, that's fantastic, become a doctor, it'll be stable. No, I want to become a writer. Prove to me that someone who's successful like you exists in America and is celebrated. Show me one, then maybe we'll think about you becoming a writer after you get the medical degree. Right? And this deep, profound insecurity, I think, also is related to colonialism, which is deeply genetic and breeded and passed down from generation to generation, that makes our brown skin color seem that it's not authentically American or worthy of swag. And I think that's something that, inshallah, in my generation, before my time's up, hopefully, we can give these models of success, which will inspire these kids, the millennials, to walk not with arrogant swagger, where we beat our chest, but with humble swagger. Muslim Americans much are educated. Bottom line, we have problems. We have Suhaib Webb, we have Haroon Moghul, we have Hind, we have Tahira, models of success that, inshallah, that can be promoted. And so that those first and second questions, this question and the question before, inshallah, I hope become extinct within 5 years. And I hope I was able to make sense.
Can I ask something quick? I know you're pressed for time. What's powerful, though, is that most converts don't idealize the white convert imams or the African American convert. They're actually deconstructing them and attacking them. Then what's even more interesting, this is a beautiful point, is as a white American Muslim, when I don't live up to that definition given by the immigrant community of what whiteness should be. And that's why I would say that you're not going to find any of the white imams, the avatars, the unicorns in the community, or even the others, right? Given real institutional say, right? Think about what happened to Sheikh Hamza in California, right? He had to eventually do his own thing. He never had real buy-in into how an institution was ran. Yeah, it's almost like what happened to Michael Jordan when he thought he was going to own that team, and basically he said to him, "You ain't owning nothing. Sorry for the double negative." That's kind of what happens to some of us. We get into these communities and people, wow, yeah, and then you say, well, I think we should tear that wall down. They're like, well, brother, it was nice having you. I think we should let Tahir read the Quran. I think it would be beautiful, and you might write an essay and defend that, and that's not taken seriously. So it'd be interesting if you went to celebrity imams, even No'mans and Yassirs and others, where Yasser and I think what we did is opt out for being imams in a community where we could have a share in a sense in our community. But initially, they were not going to consult us about any major decisions, even Islamic related. So you would come back from Azhar as a mufti, and you would live in Northern California. They never asked me one question. But when it came to a fundraiser, or it came to the Niaga, the poster, You know what I mean? You're an avatar. And I think that's why you're finding a lot of those brothers and sisters pulling out of the community. Because they would rather have, I think sincerity in what they do than being kind of used as an avatar by other community members. Yeah, it's deep. That's a very good point. Sorry for
No. We have so many excellent questions, and what I've been doing is trying to sort of elide them and put together the questions that are similar to each other. We have about 5 more minutes in the Q&A period, and I would like to use that time to have a really big question and perhaps have each one of you share a few words. And I'll start it off with, I thought it was a really great observation with somebody here. So Wajahat mentioned the truth that humans are social creatures, whether they want to be or not. Haroon, however, characterized the failure of religion, quote-unquote religion, as leading to an individualistic journey. How can the two be reconciled? The other sort of layer of this question is many people have asked about the idea of the institution of religion as being something that is repellent to a lot of individuals, which is, I think the 3 of you have touched on in each of your speeches. So if maybe the 3 of you can answer or give your thoughts on these 2 questions around the institution of religion and how can people individually sort of engage with that.
I think my comment may have been misunderstood. What I was trying to say is that religion cannot survive as an individual choice. It will be reduced to the equivalent of a fad, and fads come and go. Human beings are notoriously weak creatures. I don't buy the sort of atomistic theory of the self. We are deeply inflected by emotion, fear, insecurity, desire, temptation, loneliness, and these are just constants, and they're unavoidable. Unless there is strong community, there is no religiosity. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received the first revelation, according to some narrations, he contemplated throwing himself off the top of the mountain where he was meditating, because everywhere he looked, he saw a creature so large it covered the sky. And he would say over and over, what for Muslims is sort of the rupture in the world. I am Gabriel and you, Muhammad, are the messenger of God. And he goes home, and who does he turn to? His wife. He does not believe in himself. His wife believes in him and reassures him. Which, by the way, as an aside, is the first thing you should look for in a spouse, is someone who you feel safe with. If you're getting to know someone and you feel unable to express yourself with them, walk away. It's not worth it. The point I'm making is that as religion becomes more and more of an option, it becomes harder and harder to sustain. So I agree with Wajahat. I mean, I would say simply the phenomenon of Starbucks, which we have all consumed in dangerous quantities, is reflective of this need for socialization. That as we become more and more attached to technological devices and more capable of working in isolation, we respond on a subconscious level by desiring more and more to live in urban spaces where we are simply exposed to other human beings. We simply want to sit next to other people, even if we don't talk to them, because there's a comfort in physical proximity. It has a value that we cannot sort of pin down. But we need that. And so I would agree with that, and I think this is a challenge going forward for people. And I think this is a failure of our generation, is there is, I think as Imam Suhaib was pointing out, a degree of selfishness in that I don't want to be part of the mosque. Because one of the challenges of the mosque is you're forced to interact socially with people who are very different from yourself. And that takes a lot of humility and a lot of discipline. And it's very easy for me to say, oh, they're all judgmental. Because many times, many of us are very judgmental ourselves, and I'm speaking of myself first and foremost. And I think there is a value in being part of a community, and I know that there's communities that stink, but there are also communities that are very good, but community is ultimately a reflection of who's in them. So that, I don't know if that clarifies what I was trying to say, but I guess what I'm trying to say is individualism is if taken to extremes, dangerous because it's unhealthy.
It's a good point. It's a good question. Look, do you know what the worst punishment was back in the day when we're talking about cavemen and Neanderthals? The worst possible punishment. Anyone know? Exile. Who said that? Exile. Exile meant loneliness. It meant detachment from the tribe. It meant death.
modern age, as I said before in my speech, I'll say it again, there is this phenomenon of loneliness, right? So much so that psychology today did a study, and loneliness is the silent killer of modern humans. In fact, it takes 10 years off of a life, they said. All things being equal, health, wealth, right? A person who was lonely died at the age of 65 compared to a person who felt like they were in a fulfilled relationship. What was that book, Man's Search for Meaning? By Frankl? Was it Viktor Frankl? He survived the Holocaust, and he made an interesting observation saying, we were all emaciated, all subjugated, all oppressed. It was the ones, once they gave up hope, we saw them drop it. The next day they would die, 2 days later. The ones who retained some hope, even though it was foolish, or if you will, some faith, were the ones to keep going. And the reason why I mention that is I think, as Haroon said, pure individualism has not worked. It has not sustained the self. It has not sustained the community, and it has not sustained society in the 21st century. I just gave you some brief examples right now. Even the community of social media, we're like, I got so many Twitter friends, and you have to follow me on Twitter after today, same with Haroon and Suhaib. People still feel lonely. I mean, I walk Manhattan sometimes, and I'm always fascinated. I'm like, here I am in Manhattan, a city of 8 to 11 million people, and the great irony is, in a city of 8 million people with frenetic energy, sometimes people feel like the loneliest souls on the planet, right? And this was before marriage. Sometimes you just walk. I'd be walking there, and I'm like, wow, life is good. I'm kind of lonely. And I think there's the reason why I mention that is whether we like it or not, and it goes back to Imam Suhaib's point and Haroon's point, we need a community. Right? Human beings learn from other people, the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we dress. It's all imitation. And even when it comes to becoming a Muslim, if you will, following the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, so it makes perfect sense, right? Whether people like to admit that or not. And I think a person, as an individual, is more than just a cranium on 2 legs. I have to believe we're more than just that. Cerebellums, bipedal cerebellums, right? We have hearts, we have souls, we're messy, we have dreams. And as such, we have individual choices that will either lead us on the path towards God or something divine. But in order to do that in a fulfilling manner, as science shows, the overwhelming majority of us need to do it in partnership with the community. So it's not enough to be a healthy individual standing outside of a sick community. That healthy individual, who I think all of us, I hope, care about the community, has a role to be proactive and come back and help that community. I hope I'm making sense. Am I making sense? And inshallah, I think at the end of the day, and I want to clarify something, when I was giving those examples, it was only in the context of those unchurched, unmosqued, unsynagogued. I was not betraying the legacy or the good work of Suhaib or Bahra or Ibu here, who are doing fantastic work. They're fantastic models of civic engagement, of mosques, of healthy spiritual identities, who are openly Muslim and openly American and are able to reconcile all the messiness. Those are the models that we should promote. Those are the models that we should follow. Those are the models our kids should see so that we can walk with some humble swagger. But we do have diseased parts of the body, and then I think it is up to us, if we make the individual choice, if we care, because we're part of a community, to inshallah use our gifts, inshallah, to help everyone heal. I hope that makes sense. Thank you for your time.
Again, I want to apologize I got a few texts. I didn't mean to be Mr. Misogynist, so I don't want to laugh about that. I was dead serious. I was just relating a historical event, but I appreciate it. I think the point that is interesting to what Haroon said is that most of the scholars agree that when the Prophet Muhammad was scared, he wasn't a prophet yet. This is something that people kind of misconstrue. There's 2 narrations. That narration, Jibreel did not tell me he was a prophet. So Ibn Abi Jamrah, who's this incredible Moroccan Sufi, said that the Prophet didn't know he was a prophet until later on. And he didn't really know he was a prophet until he ran into doctrine. And God said, guess what? You're a prophet. And the idea, I think, matches kind of both of what you're saying. There's this individual effort, the seeker, the one who's looking for God, searching for God, finding God. But then at the same time, we have responsibilities. Even Khaldun said very beautifully in Muqaddimah that people are by their nature gathering together and living in community. So there's this individual reality that the prophet is scared and unaware of who he is until he falls into his wife and to others who help shape that idea through how God communicates to him. So I think where we are now, I don't think we're looking at the death of religion. I think we're looking at the reconstruction of religion. That's what I was talking about earlier. I wasn't very clear about it. And that reconstruction is really going to be, I think, as ecumenical as possible. Interfaith and interfaith. It's going to be gender sensitive as much as possible. It's going to be a community that represents, in Masajid, I mean, I hate to say it, we see, and I agree with you for the most part, they're like clubs, like the Sopranos, kind of running things. I know an imam who's on food stamps and has a month-to-month contract. You know, they're like violating labor laws with this imam, and then people are expecting him to somehow transform the community, and he's like, I can barely pay my rent and take care of things, right? So there needs to be an overhaul of kind of the system. You saw this, and when I was in the Middle East, who goes, even in Pakistan, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, who goes to religious institutions? 75 years ago, the most difficult college to get into in Azhar was the College of Adyan, you know, the religious colleges. Now, the lowest possible grade will get you into that college. They don't turn anyone away. So we're graduating people who don't have, you talked about the inability to like analyze and provide solutions, because who's being drained, aggregated into that pool? So I think that we have to reconstruct, as American Muslim community, number one, I think the concept of ordaining imams is extremely important. Not everyone can be an imam. Secondly, how do we ordain imamats? Right? There needs to be a participation of women like Tahira. You know, in Boston, we plan to hire a Muslim woman chaplain within the next year who will work as, you know, an imam to women in the community and men in the community and serve as at that institutional position. That's reconstructing reality. You're seeing now communities are not allowing 1 or 3 or 4 people to run the communities. They're starting to stake a claim into how that construction happens. And that was what I was talking about earlier. Are we going to reconstruct it based on religion and dogma, or on submission and faith that has that, you know, that beauty to it? That, and I'm glad Brian, he sent me a text, he said, man, your language was off the chain, you know, criticizing me. We should have that openness. That shouldn't bother us, right? We're growing, and it shouldn't mean that I'm bad or he's bad, or no, we're learning. So I think we're reconstructing Muslims, our identity in America. We're at an interesting phase now. And the unmasked movement is a beautiful movement because it's doing what no one could do in communities, right? The internet is allowing us to be openly critical of institutions, whereas before, there's a beautiful set of tweets on my Twitter page from yesterday by someone who talked about how in the 90s, when he tried to do something like unmasked, he was kicked out of the community. He was forced to leave, and he said, I had to pray alone for 12 years. I had no community to go to. So I think we're not seeing the end of religion, at least in the Muslim community. I think we're seeing a reconstruction of communities and then a reconstruction of religion. And my point was hopefully that it will be more faith-based than dogma-based, inshallah.
Thank you so much to our 3 panelists. Can we give them please a round of applause? Almost going to let you go. I was asked to give some of my thoughts, and I have been trying to take notes as well as listening. As I mentioned at the beginning of the evening, I just came back from Austria yesterday, so it's actually a good thing that I wasn't asked to speak. I don't know whether I would have been able to even be awake at this point to be able to give a coherent speech like all 3 of you, mashallah. But I was at this wonderful conference in Vienna in Austria on behalf of the Interfaith Youth Corps, which I had several years of experience working with. And this was an interfaith conference with a large component of Muslims, because the originators of the conference were people from the Saudi government. And the conference is, you know, co-chaired by the Saudi government, the Spanish government, and the Austrian government, and it has a lot of other these national, high kind of international supporters. And it also had a lot of practitioners, people on the ground. There were very, very few young people, very few millennials. I don't even think I saw millennials. I saw Generation Xers. We were the young people in the room. And what was very interesting about this conference is that the governments and representatives of religious houses of worship, representatives of Al-Azhar, of the Vatican, all agreed that religion, as I mentioned earlier, they all agreed that religion is something that does matter, that people's faiths do matter, and that the next question to ask is, how can people of different faith backgrounds work together? So there was that particular question around interfaith. What I found very interesting, again, was not necessarily that particular question, how can people of different faith backgrounds work together, because I know that people from different faith backgrounds do work together all the time, and especially young people, millennials, Generation Xers, people who do this as a natural way of living in America, right, at the country that I know. But the question that I was most interested in is, how can an individual person make sure that his or her morals are reflected in the larger sphere, whether that is an institution like a mosque, whether that is if you work in the media, in terms of reflecting your moral perspective on the media, and whether that is if you are in government or in academia, whatever the larger institution is. And to that end, I sought out members of the Muslim Youth of Austria. And they asked me to give a speech, a short introduction to American Islam, Muslims in the United States, and as well as short introductions to what interfaith dialogue was all about. And the questions they asked me were really about politics. How are American Muslims treated under the law? How is American Muslim identity, how is that impacted after 9/11? The questions they asked were about the narrative, about the language that we use to describe ourselves, and the language that is used to describe us. And I think it's very important for people who are interested in these questions to think about not only the internal reflection that you have as an individual person, but how that is then reflected out into the institution that you're working with, and then abroad in the larger society. So I want to thank Northwestern and Bahira and Brother Babar again for inviting all of us to come
So I'd like to also give my thanks to our esteemed panelists, Mr. Haroon Moghul and Mr. Wajahat Ali, Imam Suhaib